Hello everyone, my name is Thibault and I have the pleasure to present you a study that is part of my PhD, and today I'm going to speak about the presence of a boldness-aggressiveness syndrome and its reproductive consequences in the wild bird population. Previously, the first studies about behavior had this type of consideration. In a population, it was possible to observe one main behavior, for example, a flight of prey from a predator, and several other behaviors assimilated to random variation. We realize that this random variation may not be random and could be considered as a behavioral trait defined as a repeatable among individual behavioral differences across time and context. Now, in the literature, 5 axes were identified: activity, neophobia, and boldness, considered as reaction against environment, and aggressiveness and sociability, considered as reaction against other individuals. Some of these behavioral traits could be correlated between them and form a behavioral syndrome. And as behavioral behavioral syndromes could have a major impact on ecological and evolutionary processes, but here we will be interested in its consequences on reproductive success. If we look at current studies about this subject, several speak only about the consequences of one trait, and others study behavioral syndromes without investigating possible consequences on reproductive success. So, in this study, we have 3 main goals. Study the boldness in a nest defense context with repeatability within and between years and environmental factors that could be explained the variable part of this behavior. The second one is to assess its possible link with other behavioral traits as aggressiveness and neophobia. And finally, to quantify the consequences of possible behavioral syndromes on reproductive success in a wide population. To speak about this subject, I am lucky to have the possibility to work on the population of koala flycatchers monitored in Gotland since 1980. This species lives in a fragment woodland patches and constitute a good model for study dispersal and behavioral traits. Here we consider 3 behavioral traits recorded via 3 different behavioral tests. Aggressiveness, defined as the agonistic reaction toward competitor, the neophobia, as the latency to resume nesting feeding in the presence of another object, and boldness, defined as the agonistic reaction toward the nest predator. From a statistical point of view, we use univariate and bivariate Bayesian models. Univariate models to study repeatability within and between years, to study link with environmental factors, and link between behavioral syndromes and reproductive success. Bivariate models were used to study the existence of behavioral syndromes, and we use the variance partitioning method to identify in the phenotypic correlation the among individual correlation, which represents a behavioral syndrome in the strict sense, and environmental correlation and within individual correlation. So let's go for the results, starting with the first point, the study of boldness in a nest defense context. Consider all behavioral test variability. We perform a principal component analysis to estimate a boldness score as a sum of the number of movements within 2 meters, the number of attacks and flight over towards the dummy of predator divided by the time when the individual was present during the test. We found that this score was repeatable within and between years at satisfactory levels without and with fixed effect. Relative to environmental factors, we particularly identified a boldness differences between males and females, where males were bolder than females. We also demonstrated that an individual with a high clutch size was bolder than an individual which had a little one, and that when the partner was present during the behavioral test, the individual demonstrated a higher level of boldness. Now the second point about behavioral syndromes. Identifies a positive phenotypic correlation due to an among individual correlation only between boldness and aggressiveness, which allowed us to deduce the existence of a boldness-aggressiveness syndromes in this population. Thus, to investigate the possible consequences of these behavioral syndromes, we perform a PCA and show that boldness and aggressiveness traits were represented by the first axis. That's why we decided to create boldness-aggressiveness syndrome score as the PCA score of the first axis. Finally, for the last point, behavioral syndromes impacts on reproductive success, demonstrated here, as you can see, that individuals with high boldness-aggressiveness score have a higher fledged success than others, and so that the boldness-aggressiveness score was linked with the fledged success. Firstly, this study shows the existence of boldness in a nest defense context, reproducible at the similar level of other studies, and which varied according to sex, maybe more implication in nest defense, according to clutch size, maybe a greater motivation, and according to partner presence, maybe because individuals were stronger for two, or because there are an associative mating. Secondly, we identify an among individual correlation between aggressiveness and boldness, and so a behavioral syndromes. This result is in accordance with several studies reporting more aggressive individuals to be bolder as part of the proactive-reactive axis in different species and also in the collar flycatchers. Finally, these behavioral syndromes influence the reproductive success because we demonstrated that bold and aggressiveness individuals have a better reproductive success than shy and non-aggressive individuals. Here, it's difficult to compare this result with other studies because only few studies reveal a link between the behavioral syndromes and reproductive success, either not about a boldness-aggressiveness syndrome, for example, activity exploration in this paper, or speak about aggressiveness and boldness consequences in reproductive success, but separately. Thus, in conclusion, our result points out the presence of a boldness against predator in a nest defense context in a small passerine bird, the collar flycatchers. This study reveals the existence of a behavioral syndrome between boldness and aggressiveness. Bolder individuals are also more aggressive than others. And finally, highlights the impact of the boldness-aggressiveness syndromes on reproductive success. Individuals which exhibit a high behavioral syndrome have a better success than others. To finish this presentation, one of the next objectives of my PhD will be to investigate on a possible impact of individual dispersal status on boldness, on behavioral syndromes, and so on reproductive success. Thank you for your attention.